Happy New Year. I hope your 2020 is starting off with a bang. Thank you for listening to author stories through 2019 and all of the previous years. We had an amazing year last year and looking forward to doing bigger and better things this year. Before we get into the interview, we're going to thank a couple of sponsors who make the show possible. Please give them a shout out and look them up on Amazon and make sure that you tell them that you appreciate their sponsorship of author stories. At the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Imber War. This audio clip is narrated by the one and only Luke Daniels. You're going to love this series. I love it so much. And Richard has been a great supporter and sponsor of the show, and we're going to show him some love. Listen to the audiobook excerpt. You're going to love it, and be sure to go to audible.com to purchase it. If you're not an Audible subscriber, you can get a free book just by signing up for a free trial at audibletrial.com/Hank. You get a 30-day free trial. You get the free book. If you decide to cancel your Audible subscription, you get to keep the free book, and it doesn't cost you a single penny. audibletrial.com/Hank, and listen after the show for the clip from Richard Fox. We're so happy to have our friend Crystal Pico Watanabe as a sponsor of the show. Crystal is one of the best editors in the business, and she has just debuted a new service that I think you'll absolutely love and will help you to up your writing game. Pico's School of Wordcraft and Editing has just debuted, and the first course is called Properly Punctuating Dialogue. It's a mini course and can be completed in just about 20 minutes. It covers the basics of dialogue punctuation. Authors can get access to the new school and the course for free by signing up for Crystal's author newsletter, Notes from Pico. Go to picoshouse.com/newsletters. That's picoshouse.com/newsletters. More in-depth courses will be added in 2020. Make sure you don't miss a thing. picoshouse.com/newsletters. Unwilling Souls by Gregory D. Little. Books 1 and 2 are only 99 cents for a limited time. The gods are rightfully imprisoned, and Cess intends to keep them that way. But her terrorist father has other plans. Gregory D. Little's Unwilling Souls is a pulse-pounding chase through an epic fantasy world of adventure, sinister conspiracy, and a magical industrial revolution fueled by harvested human souls. Cess is the daughter of powerful parents who would very much like to kill one another and who therefore pretend she doesn't exist. An apprentice jailer of the gods, Cess spends her days learning to forge the tools needed to maintain the gods' prison. When her terrorist father attacks the prison on her 16th birthday, Cess is forced to flee after the secret of her parentage is revealed. Suddenly on the wrong side of the law, Cess realizes the very father who abandoned her may be the only one who can protect her. But some secrets are darker than parentage. On her way to find her father, Cess will uncover truths about her family and herself that will shatter her understanding of the world and risk the return of the gods themselves. Unwilling Souls and its sequel, Ungrateful God, are on sale now for only 99 cents. The third book of the series is coming early next year, so now is the perfect time to get up to speed. Unwilling Souls by Gregory D. Little. Books 1 and 2, only 99 cents for a limited time. Writers, I have an amazing tool to tell you about. A revolutionary writing tool for planning stories, Campfire Pro is what novelists need to go from the seed of an idea to a detailed plan that's ready to be executed. Complete your character design, create a timeline, and track your world building all in one place with our downloadable desktop app for Mac and PC. Without the annoying subscription model so many apps are using today. Visit campfiretechnology.com for special holiday pricing on Campfire Pro today. Who Wants to Love a Billionaire? Billionaires in New York, Book 1 by Laura Burton. Julie does not love being the center of attention. She makes dresses for those who do. But when Emily, her matchmaking friend, begs for a favor, Julie can't say no. It was supposed to be just one date. She never expected to kiss the guy, then fall head over heels for him. When threats start rolling in, it becomes clear someone will do whatever it takes to break them apart. Now she's in too deep, and walking away isn't an option. But with the paparazzi and drama involved, Julie cannot help but wonder, who wants to love a billionaire? Hollywood producer Harry Jackson is not an alpha male. He's goofy, sensitive, and will move mountains to make everyone happy. In fact, he requires a whole team of people to keep him from being robbed blind. Sometimes he even needs saving from his love of bad puns. But when an enemy threatens to jeopardize his chance at love, it's time to step up and fight. He's terrified, but the thought of losing Julie scares him more. Pick up Who Wants to Love a Billionaire? The Billionaires in New York, Book 1 by Laura Burton. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Joseph Fender back on the show with me. He was on last year talking about his latest book, and today he has a fantastic new release. It's called House on Fire, and if you're a Joseph Fender fan like I am, you'll know that you never know what to expect from his latest thriller, other than you're going to get a hell of a ride, which we get in this book, as always. Joseph, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
Joseph, last time we talked about your that you were the family storyteller when you were a kid.
Right.
And you told us this great story about your brother who had this fear of hair, and you made this story about, a house made of hair to kind of mess with him. Does your brother still talk to you?
He does not let me forget it, I'll tell you that.
I'll bet. That was so great.
He actually, interestingly, he'll now edit my books, actually.
Oh, that's fantastic.
He is an editor, a terrific editor, and he edits my books.
Oh,
so he gets to be sadistic right back to me.
Payback is always near. There's something I've been dying to tell you. You told us about a book that you found as a kid, The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet, and that you contacted the author, and you had this great story of kind of building this pen pal relationship with the author. And I later discovered that author is Eleanor Cameron, right?
Yep, that's right.
I actually found a copy of that book and bought it, and it sits on my shelf right here. Yeah, I'll have to tweet you a picture. It's it's kind of an odd thing, but
nice,
because of our conversation that kind of I found.
Have you read it yet or not yet?
I have. It's great. It's great.
It's a good story.
Written in the 50s, I think. Yeah. So anyway,
sort of space travel for kids.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of space fantasy. It's something we don't get to see a lot of that kind of genre mixing anymore. I love it.
No, it's true. You don't.
Yeah, I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
She had a lot of followers, Eleanor Cameron. A lot of boys. They're mostly boys. Loved her books, and I think she had an influence on a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just a fun aside. I thought you'd get a kick out of.
Yeah.
Joseph, this new book, House on Fire, is this your, I was trying to tally up, is this like your 17th full novel?
I think it's number 16.
Number 16? Okay.
I'm about to go off on book tour. It starts with the book coming out today, and I should know how many books I've written, I think. I think this is number 16.
16, and then you've contributed to 5 or 6 short story collections?
That's right.
Yeah. Man, what a great legacy to build. When you were younger, and you started, your storytelling skills started building, you obviously were a fan of thrillers and mysteries. Do you remember what the first book or maybe the first author that really kind of lit that fire for these kinds of stories for you?
Well, when I was a kid, my parents had the Ian Fleming James Bond novels around, and I remember reading one of those and being really turned on by it, getting very excited about it. Later, when I was in college, I actually discovered the novels of Robert Ludlum, and I was in a singing group, and we traveled around the world, and one member had brought a number of these huge, brick-sized novels that Ludlum used to write. And and we all took turns reading them, and we just devoured this book on the trains and the planes and that kind of thing. And I really loved it, and I realized I wanted to write something that was as transporting as these Robert Ludlum novels were, sort of as completely involving and gripping. So I think, Ludlum had a lot to do with my deciding I wanted to do this for a living.
What's interesting about Ludlum and a lot of those books that he wrote, some of the most famous were the Bourne books, which later, decades later, became these, outstanding blockbuster movies. I think a lot of people went back and found those books and, we're taken a little aback that the technology that's used in those books is, from the 70s, and there's a lot of phone booths and, hacking analog phones and things like that. But what's interesting is once you kind of get past that, the thing that you find is those stories still hold up. The characters still hold up. Even that the machinations around all of that is different. The stories still work. What do you think it is about writing timeless books? Because you do the same. You have the same way of writing these stories that get us engaged in the characters. And it's not so much about the technology and the super spy stuff as it is the emotional impact of conspiracies and things like that. What do you think it is about building those kinds of stories that help you to cut through the flash in the pan stuff?
Well, so Ludlum's books were conspiracy novels.
Right.
And there was a heavy dose of paranoia in them. And you read them and you find how effective they were in making you feel paranoid as a reader.
Oh, yeah.
Ludlum never let up on the pedal. There was always one suspenseful scene after another, one action scene after another. And they kind of grew. So it would start off with maybe someone being murdered, and then it gradually grew into a conspiracy so big that basically everyone was involved in it, but nobody knew about it.
Right. Exactly.
And, so the Ludlum novels really captured a kind of 70s conspiracy era feeling to it. And there were a lot of conspiracy movies that came out in the 70s as well. The so-called paranoid thriller came out in the 70s. And I think that Ludlum contributed a lot to that genre.
Yeah. There's something about paranoia that just cuts through. Everyone can connect to that emotion and that dread. It's a pretty safe thing for writers to tap into, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But it's, you want it to feel as real as possible, and there are different ways of doing it. Ludlum made up most of his technology. Most of the spy stuff didn't really happen that way. But nobody cared.
Right.
I like to get the details right because I think we're in a different era now where people are influenced by TV and movies and the Bourne movies, for example, and all these things where people realize what is possible, and I want to make those details authentic where I can, as long as they don't get in the way. But the thing about research, you can over-research, and you can put too much into a book. Research should be like an iceberg, where you only see the top 10% of it. The rest you never see. So I do a lot of research, but very little of it actually comes through in the books. I just a few details here and there, which are real, and I hope my readers know that.
Well, the problem with today is that if you put something in a book, 2.5 minutes on Google can debunk that. And
exactly.
So yeah,
exactly right.
Yeah, there's a tightrope you have to walk to. Do I paint this? How clearly do I do this? Or do I find a way to build that paranoia and that sense of possibility without letting them look behind the curtain?
That's right. I don't want my readers going. I mean, if they're going to Google stuff, and people will, they're going to find it's real.
Right.
Nick Heller's got a number of toys in this story, and they are real. And I got them from computer hackers and people who have done infiltrations into companies, breaking into offices and that kind of thing, using some of these toys. So they are real, and if someone Googles them, they're not going to find out that I've been making it up. They're going to see that it's real, and I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. There's that sense of authenticity that rings true. Yeah,
but at the same time, you want the story to move as fast as possible. You want people to be involved, and you don't want to sort of shred the sense that you're reading. I want people who read my books to forget they're in a novel and think they're in a real adventure. You know?
Right. Last time, Joseph, we talked about the fact that the majority of your books are standalone books. Out of the 16, a dozen of those are standalone books. But today we're talking about the new book, House on Fire, which is the fourth in the Nick Heller series. And we talked last time about what makes a book a Joseph Fender book, even if it's a standalone, what people can expect when they come to one of your books and know that you are going to take them on an adventure, and they're going to, get a certain emotional connection, and they can expect a certain style of storytelling. What brings us back to Nick Heller this time?
Well, the story, I began to read stories about the opioid crisis. There's been so many stories, and it's kind of staggering if you think about the fact that nearly 500,000 Americans have died because of opioid overdoses. And
it's a national tragedy.
Then
it's insane.
It's truly a national tragedy, and when I discovered that some of these companies that make the opioids, that sell the opioids, were recruiting doctors to prescribe them by lying to the doctors and telling them that these drugs were not addictive. When I heard that, I just sort of thought, this is a case for Nick Heller.
Yeah.
Because Nick Heller is a guy who is a contrarian, who sort of never believes the surface story, always wants to dig deeper. He will piss people off if he needs to. He gets into trouble. But he's also a vulnerable person. He's not a superhuman character. He's a human. And I wanted him to be propelled into this story by something that happened to a friend of his. And I decided that I wanted to start this whole story off at a funeral for a guy named Sean who saved Nick's life in Afghanistan. And Sean died from an opioid overdose. And Nick is really angry about it.
Yeah.
And at the funeral, he is approached by a woman who turns out to be sort of rebel daughter in this very wealthy family that's gotten rich from opioids. And she wants Nick to dig up the dirt that will prove that this company knew how addictive the drug was while it was selling it to doctors, was getting doctors to prescribe it so widely. So, and Nick hears this and he says yes right away because he's pissed off. He's angry about what happened to Sean and he wants to do things right.
Which is a great way to start a book, especially with a topic like this, because Nick is personally invested in this story. Is that something? Does that when you start with a premise like that, does that change the way you tell the story? Where this is something that Nick is personally invested in, not necessarily. Some of your stories are these kind of big giant. Multinational set pieces and big conspiracies that are more than one person. This really hits home and hits right to the heart, right in the beginning of the story. Does it change the way the story unfolds for you?
Well, when you have a motive that is as personal as this one is, it powers Nick through at a faster rate and with a great deal of emotion. I wanted Nick to be emotionally involved in this story. This is not just a case he's taken on as a lark or a case he's taken on for the money. This is a case he's taken on out of a need to set things right. And I think this is part of Nick's character and it's a problem for him sometimes too, where he wants to set things right. He wants to save people. He wants to rescue people who don't always want to be rescued. I think that starting out with a powerful emotion like this means that each of the scenes afterward are charged by that same emotion. And I think it makes for a more exciting read.
When for this book, which came first? Did the idea of the opioid crisis and the conspiracy that rolls out from there come first, or did Nick come first? Did you know that this was going to be a Nick Heller book, and then look for a situation that meant something to you that would mean something to him? Or when you started thinking about the opioid crisis, did it just make sense that this would be a Nick book?
Well, while I was working on one of my earlier books, I was reading about the opioid crisis, and when I heard about how the addictiveness of this drug has been concealed from doctors, that made me angry to think about it. And I filed that away in my head. I thought, this is perfect for Nick Heller. So when it came time to write the book, I already knew what I was going to write it about. I sort of decided previously this was a Nick Heller story. And they are, the standalones are different from the Nick Heller books. Nick Heller books, he will basically be involved in a case that will often turn out to be some kind of a conspiracy, which he sort of has to infiltrate. The standalones, I take a character and I turn his or her life upside down.
Right.
You can't do that with the Nick Heller books. I can't sort of turn his life upside down in each book. It wouldn't be believable. It wouldn't be plausible. So they're different kind of stories. But as long as they are emotionally involving, the Heller stories can be very powerful.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit earlier about some of the research that went into some of Nick's toys and some of the tools that he uses in this book. But you get really in the weeds without making us feel like we're in the weeds, talking about the pharmaceutical industry and the machinations of that whole weird corporate world and how it has this hold on society that's kind of bizarre and twisted. How do you go about doing research for things like that?
Well, I ended up talking to people who worked for pharmaceutical companies. I wanted to get a sense of what that life is like. I talked to lawyers who were hired by pharmaceutical companies. And lawyers who have these skills and these experiences are not used to talking to novelists.
Right.
So I find that when I connect with them, they tend to really want to cooperate because they know some of the inside story, and I was trying to get at some of the inside story. So I wanted to take us to a pharmaceutical sales conference, for example, where this is based on reality. I've seen YouTube videos about sales conferences at pharmaceutical companies that are outrageous.
It's pretty
really
gross, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gross. And these parties where doctors are flown in and paid a lot of money to give speeches and all that, and it's really bribery. Yeah. And so there's a lot of this dishonest salesmanship that goes on, and I wanted to capture that, and I sort of figured that this is a good way for my reader to see why Nick is so angry about it.
Yeah. This is not a difficult topic to get people engaged in. I think if all of us don't know someone who struggled with this, I think we probably know of people in our community that have dealt with this, or it's not difficult to see this kind of story far from home.
Right.
Sometimes there are topics that people can feel differently about morally, maybe. How do you deal with, and like I said, this is not a difficult book. This is not one of those to get people to understand the story that you're telling. But sometimes there are topics in a thriller, in a conspiracy, that people may come down on both sides of the issue. How do you deal with a moral issue that's important to you without coming off as moralizing and preachy in a book? Because I never get that from your books. I always learn something, and sometimes I come away feeling a little differently about something. I've learned something in the book. How do you balance that?
Well, I think it's a lot more interesting if you see the other side, if you see both sides of an issue or different sides of an issue. So I wanted to show that I had someone in the book make the point that some people really need opioids. That, it's not cut and dry, that these are bad things. There are some people who need them. And I even have the Conrad Kimball, the dynasty head, give a pretty persuasive speech about what good work he has done. And I wanted the reader to sort of read that speech and imagine that scene and realize this is what this guy believes. So there are different sides to the story. And I think just by presenting them in a way that doesn't feel preachy, by just sort of making it part of the action, part of the scene, part of the dialogue, I think that is a way of getting the point across without lecturing, because that's what I don't want to do. I want these books are primarily page turners, but I want them to be page turners that make you think. I want everyone to sort of put down one of my books and say, not only was that exciting, but I learned something. I want them to get something out of it as well, and not that I have a case to make. I didn't start writing this book out of a desire to teach people about the opioid crisis. I wrote this book out of a desire to make people turn the pages. But I thought if we brought in something that's a real crisis today that people can get angry or upset about, that would just make it more exciting, which I hope it did.
Exactly. Joseph, over these 16 novels, how has your writing process changed? We talked a lot last time about that first book and how you rewrote it 25 times, and you had that great agent who took the time to give you personal feedback and to help you work through some of the issues that you had with the first book, and what a growing and learning experience that was. But you're a consummate professional now, and when each year you've got a new story to tell, and we can expect one of your thrillers to show up on our shelf about this time. As you go through the daily work of being a writer and being a thriller writer, how have you changed from then to now?
Well, the stories that I tell are more human, personal involved, I would say. I am a lot more interested in character than I used to be, without slowing the pace down. So I am ruthless when I write something. I'm ruthless in cutting if I think it slows down a sequence or a scene. But I found that I can create full-blooded characters, or as full-blooded as they can be in a fast-moving entertainment. I can do characters that feel real to us and have that not slow things down, have that actually deepen the reading experience. So I think more about the characterization than I used to, frankly. But if you're not improving, I've written 16 books and I haven't gotten better at it, something's wrong. I've been doing this for 30 years, You got to get better at it.
Right. Well, there's something great about reading a book that you walk away thinking maybe differently about the world and our place in it, and kind of the bigness of the world and the people in it, but it's something very different than when you close the book, you feel like you've been on a journey with a friend. And that's what I love about like House on Fire. At the end of it, I felt like I'd been somewhere and I'd experienced something with someone I cared about. And that's an amazing experience. Yeah.
That's great because that's what I aim to do. So it's really great to hear that it worked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joseph, since this book is out now, and it's out everywhere, there's links to it in the show notes. What are you working on now?
I'm working on a standalone, and it's too early for me to talk about it. It's sort of, there's a part in the process when it's early, when I'm still plotting it, but I found that it's not a good thing for me to talk about it because it lets the air out of the balloon. Yeah. I have to sort of keep it under wraps for a while. But so it's a standalone that's also very contemporary. And the one after that I've already thought about is Nick Heller. Nice. I'm glad to see more coming from Nick. I love the standalones, but there's something about getting invested with a character and going on an extended journey with them. Thank you. Yeah, and sort of seeing and doing it book after book. Yeah.
Right. I love what you're doing, Joseph. The new book, House on Fire, is out everywhere now. When you're hearing this, audiobook, hardback, Kindle edition, however you like to read books, you can find it. There's links to it in the show notes. If folks want to connect with you online and dig into your back catalog and all the great stuff you're doing, is there a place where they can find you and connect with you?
Yeah. My website, josepffender.com, or on Facebook, which is Joseph Fender, or even on Twitter, @JoeFender. So I'm Mr. Media, Mr. Social Media.
There you go. Excellent. We're going to send everyone to see you. Joseph, so much fun talking always. Thank you for this great book, and thanks for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Imber War.
The near future. Humanity's only hope of survival entered the solar system at nearly the speed of light. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come, then the probe would annihilate itself. There would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, It landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy, one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed "Answer Me" over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. When did I get this app? He thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" "You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right, .doc. Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen," the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. "Come. Now." Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to his ear, Mark stopped and looked around before deciding how to continue. Spiked ocotillo plants looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. "You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire?" the caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.